Good evening, everyone. It's the last webinar of this series, and today we have with us Mr. Siddharth Chaturvedi, MM 2011, and he is going to talk on a topic which is of rural entrepreneurship, innovations, and ecosystem. The word ecosystem, I asked him again because many people had asked me, is it a typo? He said it's a little of irreverence. So over to you, Siddharth. All the best.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nikhil sir, for the opportunity. And what I'll do is I'll just switch off my video so that everyone can kind of listen to me properly. Um, yeah. So I would want to start this whole session by saying that I'll be speaking from the limited experience that I have. Um, Before that, I'll just share my screen with you guys. Please let me know, Nikhil sir, if you can see my screen.
The screen is perfect. You just have to go to the slideshow. Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I was just saying that I will share whatever I have seen of rural development from my bounded rationality, and I have been part of a couple of government programs, but largely related to women self-help groups. So this is where I will start from, and I'll try to do the translations where needed, and also try to set the context where needed. Please let me know if additional context is needed by anybody. Okay, so here we go. So let's talk about rural entrepreneurship, wherein we are just trying to understand what is different about rural entrepreneurship as compared to other entrepreneurs, and whether it looks like this, wherein we wear a funny hat and we go into the farm. So what I did just for my understanding, and when I entered the sector as an urban born and urban bred person, what is a village and what is a farmer and what is poor. So if you Google these words, these are the pictures you get on. These are like the first 10 results. Obviously, I have taken pictures that suit my narrative, but the poor person or rural or the farmer, these are all the same to the outside world who have not been exposed to rural entrepreneurship per se. So this is one perception I just thought I'll address right up front. And in this talk, the Honorable Minister, Finance Minister of India, recently changed the definition of micro, small, and medium enterprises. And she said that the turnover range up to 5 crore will be micro enterprises. But where rural enterprise feature is something even lesser than 5 crore, and if someone has a 5 crore annual turnover, then that's like a very, very large enterprise when it comes to the rural context. So what I'll be focusing on is the yellow highlighted piece here, which are very, very small micro enterprises to the tune of turnover of maximum 1 crore to 2 crore per year. Now, if we look at rural entrepreneur and urban entrepreneur, before we get into the differences, there are some common attributes, which is if you see the picture on the left, the farmer also has a similar swag to the urban entrepreneur on the right. Both have high ambitions, both have a go-getter attitude, both think of themselves as heroes, and the society thinks of them as heroes, because they do go the extra mile to either bring services, bring products which have or meet an unmet market demand. So these are the common traits of any entrepreneur, whether rural or urban. But what about the opportunities? So if you look at what an entrepreneur looks like, this is some of the Indians might relate to it, that every entrepreneur takes a risk. It says risk to Spider-Man ko bhi lena padta hai, but essentially every entrepreneur, the fundamental quality is that they're able to take a risk. And if you look at the support system that is available for urban entrepreneurs versus rural entrepreneurs, so it's hard to understand this, because when we talk of startups or new companies, then we suddenly start thinking of, oh, co-working spaces, incubators, I want to raise X amount of funding and I'll build this app will aggregate. Because the precedents that we have as urban bred people are the Ubers of the world, the Amazons of the world, e-commerce platforms, Paytms and all that. But what about rural enterprises? So if I have to just break it down in the primary four pieces, so any rural enterprise that starts, they do not have any opportunity to raise financing where they don't have to repay. So they all start with debt. That is something that the urban entrepreneurs, I'm not saying they don't invest their money, that it's a bit of I'm not trying to opinionate myself against urban entrepreneurs, but this is the fact of life, that once initial first year or 2 years an urban entrepreneur has invested, then there's a whole slew of support ecosystem, right from co-working spaces, incubators, angel investors. Whereas for the rural entrepreneurs, it is not so. It is more that they will go to a bank which will ask for their cash flow statements, which they don't generally maintain, and they have a low amount of loan that they need to start their businesses. So the banks don't even entertain that. And then the innovation in their businesses is more to sustain the business, whereas in case of urban entrepreneurs, it's more towards novelty. Oh, what's new? Is this a new kind of a smiley? Is this something like a TikTok wherein I can upload videos? But it's not, essentially not necessarily. There are obviously exceptions, but they're not essentially solving a problem. That's where the convenience and the need piece comes in. So as we go on, there will be more examples that I can share with you guys. So what I started with earlier as to what rural entrepreneurship looks like, rural entrepreneurship, that's the typical perception that we guys carry. But what essentially is rural entrepreneurship is, if you look at farm and you look at the centerpiece right here, the tomato picture there, that is sorting of tomatoes as per their grade. That is what farmer producer organizations do, which is a very small piece of what they do, so that they can sell tomatoes to buyers at a competitive price. On the left, you can see there are women who are sitting with solar lamps. This is a photograph from the Barefoot College in Telonia, wherein illiterate women are trained to become solar engineers or solar mechanics. So they are trained on how to assemble a solar lamp. And when they go back to their villages, they are able to earn a livelihood out of it. On the right, you can see what I had shared earlier as an article also is a typical rural retail shop or a kirana shop. Below therein, we can see beekeeping happening. On the left side corner, there are obviously handicrafts, handlooms that a large number of rural community is engaged on. And the middle is a food service enterprise. So I just wanted to address this, that rural enterprise is not just farm, it's not just farmer, it's not just pesticide, tractors and all that. It's much, much more than that. So that's one. Now, rural enterprise per se is both on an individual basis and on a collective basis. And if rural enterprises started on a collective basis, that's where there are a lot of learnings to be had and risks to be shared. So before I get into what exactly are collective enterprises, I would like to touch upon a bit as to what collectives essentially are. So there are two kinds of collectives that I have come across in my experience. One are the welfare collectives and one are the enterprise collectives. The welfare collectives are the self-help groups or joint liability groups. These are basically groups wherein people from similar economic background, they start saving minimum amount of money on a weekly or a monthly basis, which is like a collective kind of insurance. So once any of them faces a problem, they can interloan from each other from the group itself. It's a welfare collective because everyone has an equal stake on the money that is being saved. And then these are federated. For example, self-help groups could be federated into village level organization, and villages could be federated to cluster level federations. This was the part of the program that Government of India runs and a lot of non-government organizations run. But the enterprise collectives have a different DNA. because therein the equity goes away and the enterprise takes over. So here, if you look at producers of a certain kind, like handloom, handicraft coming together, and if they come together, they they are liable to get their products rejected also if they are not up to the mark. They have to be competitive in the market. They have to sustain themselves. This is true for even beekeeping, that beekeeping groups coming together so that they can get collective trainings and all that. But some of the enterprises are individual. At the same time, in handlooms and handicrafts, there are bulk orders that come to producer groups and producer companies. So producer company is a more formal entity, and these producer companies interact with what we call as social enterprises or bulk buyers, that who can buy from these companies, and they get a regular kind of income flowing. So this is a broad collective kind of an approach. And if you look at what are the benefits of collectives, so one is, as I said earlier, that individually it's very hard for a farmer or a villager to get loans because they don't really maintain books, and there is no credit history that they have. But as a group, when they come together, they're liable to get loans because a, the size of the loan is larger, and two, that once there are additional resources in place, they have a better bargaining power, both with the financial services and also with the vendors. So the ability to do business kind of increases. And also third is that rural households are very, very vulnerable. So when I had spoken about the welfare collectives here, Government of India and other NGOs, they also support these welfare collectives for a vulnerability reduction fund, which is because all their economics goes for a toss if they have a health hazard in their home or if there's natural hazard. Even today in the COVID pandemic, it is these daily wage laborers or poorest of the poor who are affected the most. So once these guys come together, there's a sharing of risk and reward. And third is obviously that once we get so many people together, there's a tendency to produce higher at a higher quality, and there are some productive norms that we can work as opposed to individual entrepreneurs. Having said that, there aren't too many examples of successful collective enterprises. When I say successful, I mean people like these. So Amul is an example that India has been quoting across the world for ages now, but there hasn't been a second Amul till date. And there are of course there are reasons around that as to why there hasn't been a second Amul, but there have been smaller other examples, like an Araku coffee in Andhra Pradesh has come up, which is building on the organic coffee brand, which has seen quality HR coming in, being led by an international grad student of MIT, and he is coming in and he's saying, no, I want to run this professionally. And that is the kind of risk appetite, that is the kind of experimentation that is needed even in collective enterprises. On the left, we have something, a company called Industry. It is based out of Bangalore, and one of the awarded Ashoka change makers. They have brought together producer groups, which I had mentioned earlier, enterprise collectives, and they are one of the social enterprises that have developed a profit sharing model with these producer groups. So they both produce handicrafts and handloom products. At the same time, the producer groups do that. Industry group brings orders to them. So it's a symbiotic relationship. But again, these examples are far and few, and there are obvious reasons to it. That okay, who is investing in them? Who's going to do the project management? Do I have enough margins to work with? Do I have enough customers to work with? And unfortunately, even today in our system, especially in rural development, there's a high dependence on government, along with a sense of entitlement, that whenever someone comes to a rural community, what grant are they bringing? Are they bringing something for free? So the enterprise enterprise circle or enterprise vigor that is needed in rural areas is missing slightly because of this reason. Now, I'm sorry, I kind of digressed. So I spoke about Amul, whereas I said I'll be talking about smaller and smaller and smaller enterprises. So here are a few examples of collective enterprises that I have been part of. On the right hand top is Didi Ki Rasoi. It is a canteen that was established in civil hospitals of Bihar. These are women-owned canteens, and these are women-run canteens. They are providing quality food to civil hospitals. And as we all know, civil hospitals don't get quality food because of a huge nexus with prevailing vendors. They have orders, they take vendorship of everything that is to be provided in the hospital, and a per plate rate. So just from my experience, a per plate cost of providing food to a patient to a normal vendor would come somewhere around 35 to 40 rupees, whereas the selling price is 100 rupees. These Didi Ki Rasoi, to them the cost is coming around 85 to 90 rupees. So they are barely making it through, and therefore they have a cross subsidy model wherein they are running a restaurant also, a walk-in restaurant. The hospital has allowed them to serve outside the hospital also. That's helping them kind of break even. So this is one of the enterprises that I was fortunate to be part of, the first Didi Ki Rasoi that came up in Bihar. This is a picture from Vaishali, Bihar. Below we have what I call as a rural retail shop. I'll just explain the concept in brief. So there's a high density of mom and pop stores, or kirana stores as we say, in India, and these are serving the last mile. But they spend a lot of time and transaction cost in going to cities to buy the grocery items. So this is a wholesale shop that has been set up close to their villages, wherein which will buy again at bulk, as I said, collective bargaining, and provide to these kirana stores at a higher, so that they can have a higher margin and a lower transaction cost. And on the left hand top, there's a sanitary napkin making unit. When women come together, so they are trained on making sanitary napkins, and they're linked to some of the government initiatives, especially schools, wherein they can supply on a regular basis. In the times of COVID, many of these sanitary napkin making units are today producing masks, which are going out to the general public and meeting the high demand that is coming up. So I'll just stop there for a moment. If there are any questions until now, or shall I just wait for the end?
The end, yeah. Yes, go
Sorry.
ahead. Please go ahead. The presentation should get over. Questions
Okay. Okay. So now I come to a very exciting part of my presentation, that we all want to innovate, and innovation is a very fuzzy word. I'm happy that our professors are not here, otherwise I might have got maybe a P- on this. But we really, innovation is still a very fuzzy concept, and having practiced it within the government, I'm just sharing some of the experience that I came across and some of my frustrations regarding to the word as well. Now, innovation, if we Google, so these are the definitions that we get: the action or process of innovating, the new method, idea, product, etc. But if we Google Jugaad, then we get a flexible approach to problem solving that uses limited resources in an innovative way. Now, these are too many words put together, and there's a very famous book called Jugaad Innovation, which for me is an oxymoron. But if you just look at the depiction on the left and on the right, the left one is very sophisticated, whereas on the right, what we have is something which is like, okay, looks like something new, but we really don't know. So this is like, jugaad is an obviously an Indian Hindi word, a North Indian word to be more precise. But when we say jugaad, what do we mean exactly? Again, Jugaad, what the book says is this. But when Indians talk about Jugaad, we are essentially trying to work around the system. We are trying to make the system flexible. We are not trying to find flexible solutions. This is what my understanding is. And therefore, when I went through the book, which obviously gives a lot of insights, I have nothing against the book, but I found that it is not about Jugaad. So the book quotes an example of one of the leading companies of leading social enterprise of India, the founder of which has also been awarded the Raymond Magsaysay Award, Harish Hande. And Harish Hande brought in microfinance bit to support solar home systems. So that because rural households are unable to afford solar home systems, he wanted to bring in a microfinance bit so that they can afford that, which the book calls as Jugaad. So which kind of put me off that this is not what Jugaad means. One of the essential items I believe across the regions, because I'm also working in Southeast Asia, uh, across regions, is to develop our own understanding of our own solutions. We although it's good to have formal understanding of what the West brings in, but at times you also have to understand what essentially it means. It's unfortunate that we had to have a book on Jugaad for Jugaad to become a mainstream word. A little bit more on that. So on the left, we see again is what is called an innovation. This is a photograph of Velo Water. Now, Velo Water is a fantastic innovation which has removed the drudgery of thousands of women who carry water, who used to carry water on their heads. So what they've done is they've designed a Velo Water wheel so that they can just roll it on the ground and bring water home. Now, this woman, the founder, has also been featured at TEDx Gateway and at other channels, and it has been recognized as a very good innovation for drudgery reduction. Now, on the right is something that we found out as part of Bihar Innovation Forum, which I was leading. This is a mobile pump set. So for small farmers to carry the pump set to their fields is very difficult. And Ganesh Kumar Singh, he built a mobile pump set, as you can see, which can be loaded onto a cycle and taken to the field. Now, we found it from somewhere and it is working. We have tried to award it as an innovation, but it is not recognized. If at best to the mainstream management guys, it would still sound as Jugaad. And this is, again, I'm not saying I'm here to break perceptions or anything, but I'm here to show a reality as to how the packaging of a particular solution can be termed as innovation and Jugaad. So people say innovation is Jugaad, Jugaad is innovation. It's essentially how easy the product can be used. And after spending good 8 years on innovation and Jugaad and all that, I realized it really doesn't matter. What matters is whether we are able to make an enterprise out of it, whether we are able to reach out to the last mile and deliver some quality. So staying on the same subject, I would just
पुराना साइकिल था हमारे पास, जिस साइकिल को हम बेचना चाहे, कम पैसा लगाया 100 रुपया, तो हम बोले कि काहे के लिए देंगे, उसको देखते हैं कोई दिमाग लगा के तरकीब अगर बन जाए तो अच्छी बात है। लेकिन लगाते लगाते दिमाग इसमें लगाया तो हल्का सिस्टम हमारा बन गया हाफ साइकिल में। फिर इसको जो है लेके गए लोहार के पास, जैसे जैसे बताते गए वैसे वैसे वो बेचारा बनाते गया, बनाते बनाते जो है बना के पूरा ठीक किया। रुपया 700 रुपया मांगा, हमसे 700 रुपया उनको दे दिए। इससे जो है हमारा बाड़ी जो है गोभी का खेती थोड़ा बहुत कर लेते हैं, साग का खेती कर लेते हैं। उसके बाद जो मकई का खेती है, वो जो जहाँ की 6-7 आदमी 8 आदमी लगते हैं, वहाँ जो है हम लोग 2-3 आदमी काम कर लेते हैं। इससे हमारा गेहूँ श्री विधि का यहाँ जो है बहुत शानदार अच्छा बिजाई इससे हो रहा है।
So this is again innovator which we found out, and these are obviously principles that have been borrowed from the National Innovation Foundation led by Professor Anil Gupta of IIM Ahmedabad. But again, none of these innovations have been taken to scale. They haven't been adopted. Although, if you look at the application of the innovation for small landholding farmers, there are immense. So, for benefit of my friends from Philippines and other countries, there's a small innovator who has basically modified a cycle which can be used as a plow for small fields, and that's what was being depicted in the video. The third piece of innovations is how do we learn from the best practices. So if you look at the map of India, this is where Bihar is, and within Bihar there's a very small town there, if you can see the red arrow, called Madhepura. Now there is some guy sitting in Madhepura, and he has something in common with the TED Global Fellow, which is Hole in the Wall. It was the first and very well celebrated Global Fellow, Hole in the Wall, Sugata Mitra. So this is something he told us himself when we found him, that I understood the whole principle of letting people discover their own interests. And what he did was that he he had his own computer servicing shop, and he created some websites and softwares for the local region. But he found youth who were interested in computers, and he let them play or be on the computers for 5 to 10 days. He discovered their interests, he honed their skills, and he helped them set up their own shops and own businesses. So this is the guy Sandeep Shandelia who has been able to do that, and this is how the cross learning on innovation happens. Again, the good thing is that when we gave Samidha Group a platform, NIIT recognized his efforts, and he had trained around 1,000 people in the past 5 years when we had found him. And NIIT took an exam, and all 1,000 of his alumni were given an NIIT certificate. That's how good they were. Now I'm just coming back that if you look at the rural enterprise landscape, there is not much difference in the entrepreneur per se. The enterprise, obviously, the support system, obviously, but the entrepreneur, the principal elements of entrepreneurship, they remain the same. Now I'll just move on to some of the lessons that I have learned. In the past 10 years, there have been a lot of failed initiatives, and I'm going to take up only a couple of them, which has helped me become stronger, has helped me build my character. So this is a very common common idea that all of us kind of come across when in our interaction with the government is, okay, why have they just dug up the road and they're laying the pipes when the road was just made 10 days back? Why can't they talk? What is the problem? Why can't there be convergence efforts? So one of the convergence efforts that I was a part of was between Ministry of Rural Development, wherein we were working with the welfare collectives, and Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, that provided off-grid energy, solar lamps, improved cook stoves, etc., etc. So we said it's a very clear kind of convergence, very simple convergence, when MORD, the Ministry of Rural Development, can bring in the demand side, and Renewable Energy Ministry can bring in the supply side. And there were various models that we could have tried of ownership, of franchisee, and other things. But despite there being a direct monitoring by the then Minister of Rural Development himself, this thing did not take off. Here is the second initiative, Bank of Ideas and Innovations, which was launched on 14th August 2014. So this was based on the learnings of running a development marketplace in 2 states of India for rural innovations. Now, having learned from that, it was, since there was a precedence, the government of India wanted to take it ahead. The government of India wanted to take it ahead at the behest of the new government's, again, central minister. This initiative also did not take off despite having a lot of fanfare. It did not take off because perhaps it wasn't the right time. It did not take off because there was perhaps not the buy-in of bureaucracy. And that's what I just thought I'd spend a couple of minutes on how the government kind of functions and what happens eventually. So when we talk of ecosystems, which was a tongue in cheek when I kind of put it in, is even though the minister wanted this to run, why didn't it run eventually? At one point in time, I'm speaking from my personal experience, since I was leading this effort, at one point in time, I had three bosses. The person in the picture on the left was one of my bosses, and there were two other bosses, and I was like a ping pong ball because no one was taking a decision as to what should happen next, whether we want to launch this program, whether we want to invest X amount of money. And everybody sitting here is a decision maker, but they are there not by choice, but because they've been asked by the minister to sit. And that was one of the major learnings that I had when I saw this program kind of go down. So there was a huge amount of money spent just on bringing this program together, but it was very unceremoniously shut down also. I still remember I was just called one day by my boss and I was told, let's look at a different strategy, and that was the end of it. So just looking at what worked and what did not. So what did work when what did not work when I talk about my engagement with Ministry of New and Renewable Energy was, although we felt that there are a lot of technologies out there, they really weren't ready for adoption by the community. And second was that within the ministry, the rigor of being able to identify market ready technologies was missing. From my side, I felt that there was a pragmatic approach of making the partnerships work was missing. When I say that because I felt that especially in Bank of Ideas and Innovations, the the kind of reach I expected, the kind of impact I thought we could make, and the budget that could have flown or could have been agreed by the ministry wasn't pragmatic. So that was a learning for me. And fourth, as I said, there was no ownership by any of the ministries. So there were four ministries in Bank of Ideas, there were two ministries in new and renewable energy, but the initiative wasn't owned by either of them. So this is something that did not work. At the same time, what worked was that, and this is very surprising, that politicians whom we blame for most of the problems in the country, they took the right initiatives, at least in the case that I have been part of. So they took the right kind of initiatives. There were a lot of partners ready to support these convergence efforts. So in Bank of Ideas, we had many consulting agencies, many donor agencies who were ready to support as soon as we went on ground. Similarly, in with my convergence efforts of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, we had a Selco Foundation who was supporting us as a knowledge partner. And there was a slew of entrepreneurs who were just waiting for us to hit the ground. So that was a very big positive from the civil society. And I also realized that if we have to make something work as a pilot or as a new idea, it's much more easier to work with the state governments, and if possible the district administration. The lower we go, the easier the decision making becomes. Obviously the scale and the project aspirations are also tempered accordingly. And the fourth was obviously uh, with Bank of Ideas and with Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, prototypes are available. But at the same time, and this is where I move to my next slide, that there are a lot of prototypes available, there are a lot of makeshift solutions available, but there are very few organizations that are ready to build, invest in these prototypes and take them to scale. So these are some of the huge players of the existing ecosystem of our of the development sector that I am part of. Some of them are like giants, and the giants name is what I've tried to put in here. Pradhan is an NGO that has been working in the tribal regions for good 30 years now, maybe more than 30 years now. It is almost at the same time that Basics was founded. Amol is an international example. But outside of these agencies that have been mentioned here, so especially the NGOs, all NGOs are identified not by their name, but by the founder's name. So this is something, obviously I would request my seniors also to share their views once we end the presentation. But it is always the leader who is being recognized. And many of these NGOs are closed down or are not able to achieve the expected impact because they are personality driven. And NGOs doing similar kind of work are not ready to talk to each other, are not ready to partner with each other, because somehow everyone thinks that they have got the silver bullet and they have got the holy grail which will solve all the world's problems. On the other hand, if you look at the corporate, we are filing anti-competitive laws, we are accusing them of carteling. So it's very hard to understand. And once you understand, you get it that, boss, these are not really organizations, these are personalities who have built institutions. And it's not that these institutions are not working, no. The challenge is that once these institutions, once the person leading them doesn't have a transition strategy to pass on their leadership to the other person, what will happen then? Having said that, let's move ahead. Let's move to where I am working, and agencies like Asian Development Bank, United Nations Development Program. So this whole, why do I call it an ecosystem? Because I have to like the person sitting in the World Bank, and he has to like me. And honestly, one has to suck up to the other if one has to get their jobs done. And the egos need to be kind of put at ease, even before we kind of to start talking of impact. So it's very hard to understand, but I'll give you an analogy of cricket, that at times we feel, oh, these guys, they don't feel that they are playing for the country. How can they just lose the match like that? And I feel at times that when I am working for rural development, we at times do lose sight of the person sitting at the last mile, the person at the end of the line. We do lose sight of them, and what we are essentially arguing or discussing about is my word against yours. And obviously at the top of the heap, it is not a hierarchy, but at the top of the heap obviously lies the central government and state governments. And a very big, I'll say, a risk that all programs carry, which are working with the government. And as I said earlier, we are dependent on the government when it comes to rural development. A very big risk that we carry is that as soon as the leadership in a particular government body or a program changes, everything kind of comes to a halt for good 6 months. And the consistency of leadership is something that all these players below the state governments are trying to lobby for, so that the work that has been done in the past, it doesn't just come to a sudden halt. Okay. Now I'll just share the last piece is about how can we create value? How can we create value outside of means it is not just NGOs who are feeding the poor that are creating value. There is a business case to it. Most of the people joining today's talk are MBAs, and I would like to share a very heart-wrenching example which I learned very early in my career, and I just thought it would be good to share with everybody. This is not my example. So there were the welfare groups in Maharashtra, and one of the ladies called Mrs. Chetna Gala Sinha, she was working with them for financial inclusion, bringing them to the mainstream, helping them save and then get some mainstream credit. Now, they have been doing it for a while, but these women were illiterate. And what they did was that since they had been doing it for 5-7 years, they thought, why don't we try and form our own women's bank? And so Mrs. Chetna Gala Sinha, she approached the Reserve Bank of India, which is the federal bank in India. They approached the Reserve Bank of India and they applied for a banking license. But the banking license was rejected because the women were illiterate. And Chetna Gala Sinha, in her own by her own confession, says that she came back to the village. She sat and she cried with these women. She said, I don't understand. Whatever we are doing is right. Why can't we just get a banking license? And to her surprise, the women, they said, so what's the big deal? Give us 6 months, we'll learn how to read and write. And to again Chetna Gala's own words, she said, I was extremely surprised because I wasn't used to this kind of failure. And with this, whereas the villagers, the women were used to hearing no all the time. So they just went back after 6 months. And when they presented in front of RBI again, the DG told them, tell me the profit calculation, the margin calculation of certain numbers. And he also had his own accountant sitting there. And the women, they calculated the profits much before the accountant could, even though he had a calculator. They came back with the banking license and Mandeshi Bank was formed. The first rural women bank started by women in 1997. So this was a story I wanted to share with you, that how rural entrepreneurship, the aspirations are the same, and how the value that is being created is not just limited to one person or 100 people. It could be shared across the board, because a Mandeshi Bank is now supporting multiple villages, not just women. Some more examples of creating shared value is in this sector. We can look at very recently Amazon has tied up with thousands of Kirana stores, and Flipkart and Reliance Retail are looking to do the same so that orders can be placed. They want to reach the last mile. So this is not charity, this is not philanthropy, this is just pure business. There's a company by the name of Store King, which is doing, which has a whole business dedicated to building this rural supply chain and making products, both financial and grocery products, available at the last mile. In all this, they are making a company of their own and surviving on their own. If you look at banking, there's a banking correspondent, Sakhi. These are basically, Sakhi is a word in Hindi which means female friend, not like a girlfriend, but Sakhi is more like a friend. So banking correspondent Sakhis are women trained by the banks to deliver financial services at the last mile, as you can see in the picture. These could be cash, these could be small loans, and this is pure banking. This is again not philanthropy. In Kerala, which is slightly more developed, women are running metro services, right from ticket counters to engine, to running the trains, to managing the whole train stations. And not just metro services and serious things like these. We also have entertainment, which is also earning from the sector, and many more. And that's where I end. Yeah.
Thank you, Siddharth. It was a very engaging talk, and I'm happy to acknowledge the presence of our Philippine Alumni Chair, Coratek Jimenez. Coratek is MDM, and she was the General Manager of Metro Manila Authority during Nana Aquino's time, and she is very much into development management. Coratek, I would like you to say a few words about the presentation, if you can. Coratek.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't able to see the first part of the presentation, but I just have one question. to the speaker what are the chances of funding for projects that you have right now? Because the NGOs are really will not be lucky enough to get funding. So how will you be able to do that and pursue with all your projects in India?
So thanks for that, Koratek, and my privilege to hear a question from you.
So yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that the way the World Bank functions is that we give grants to the government itself. And in the post-COVID, in the COVID aftermath, something that we have done is that we have, from the existing projects, we have carved out a separate head altogether that will be supporting enterprises and organizations that are working on the COVID pandemic. So very recently, a 300 crore package was released to the government of Tamil Nadu. And 2 weeks back, World Bank had provided $1 billion to the government of India. Now, within our bounded, how should I say, constraints in which we can work, we cannot directly work with the NGOs. But what we do is we fund relevant agencies of the government and we help them associate with high quality NGOs. So that's the function that World Bank does in India. Is all I can share right now.
Yeah. Is that
does that answer your question?
we also have with us the Alumni Relation Officer, ARO from AIM, Bernie. Hi, Bernie. Thanks for joining in.
Hi, Nikhil. Good
Any
to be
question
here.
you would like to ask any question to Siddharth?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not really in the development work, but I would just like to comment on that ecosystem. It's something, it's the first time I've seen something like it. And I think it speaks very much about what happens in the development world as well as in the business world. So I guess, in some ways, there are those similarities.
Thanks, Bernie. We have our past Indian President and famed Chairman Emeritus MP Singh, sir. Mr. MP Singh, you would like to ask a question to Siddharth? You can please unmute yourself, Mr. Singh. No, you have to unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
thanks.
sir.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir. Go ahead.
Good. First of all, compliments to Siddharth for such a lucid presentation. In fact, it comes at the right time, not only to this audience, which is very small that I can see, but to the whole country when the government has announced all these wonderful rural-based schemes and incentives galore. And I think it's an opportunity for many of us to take advantage of this and take insights from Siddharth's well-studied, well-researched presentation. I wonder whether he comes from Bihar. Do you come from Bihar, Siddharth? Or?
No, sir. I come from Uttarakhand, but I worked extensively in Bihar.
Oh, really? Yeah. You look like you have a facial impression of an Uttarakhandi and not of a Bihari. So keep it up. I had a couple of questions. I don't know whether time will permit. Nikhil, do I have the time for about 2-3 minutes to ask some questions? Because there's a background.
Yeah, definitely. No problem. Please go ahead.
Whether it's Philippines or India, the farmers' conditions has been the same. The life of a farmer in these countries, it revolves basically around it's family, their health, the cattle, their land. And, the farmer loses the battle somewhere along the line. He doesn't win the battle. I mean, I'm from a very strong rural background. Of course, we have been large farmers in the past, but I've seen farmers struggling and not being able to make good of their life and farmers, unless somebody in the family gets education, goes out and does something here and there. My question to you is that, and I was probably sharing with Nikhil some time back. I had come across some very good piece of research paper that was like a model for increasing the income of the farmers, even with the 1 acre of land holding. This was a PhD scholar, one Dr. Sarkar from Calcutta. I lost track of him. But do you have or have you been involved in any model of this type that can give some kind of clue to the farmer as to what all can he do to enhance his income? Our PM says that our farmers should be able to double their income by within about few years time from now. But how? No, there's no wherewithal, there's no model that would, because Indian farmers' average holding, as is very small, not even an acre sometimes. But I'm saying, I read that book and it says that in 1 acre one can earn X amount of money and then take care of the family at the same time. Do you have, or have you studied, or have you been part of any such model development? That's one thing. Because ultimately, Siddharth, farmer is not going to be a winner in this country. His position in our society is going to remain as, and it hurts me more because I see them going down rather than coming up, despite all these distributions of free cash and this and that and loan waiver and whatnot that you have. Their lot is really not improving. Of course, people are relatively happier, but are they really having that fishing rod that catches the fish and feeds them all the time, or they're still waiting for? So it's a political question also, but have you been part of any such model that can really guide us through? And then I have some other questions that I'll ask you separately, but this one is the one that was in my mind.
Sure, sir. So the question actually, I understand it's to PM Modi, but I'll try to answer whatever I can. So there are there are a lot of initiatives like the one you said, like a 1 acre fund is there. Maybe the book that you read, which is talking about how more earnings can be met. Then there is also zero budget natural farming that has come up. Then there is zero tillage. Multiple such initiatives are there that can help farmers sustain. In fact, one of the fundamental things, if I may just kind of dive in, is also around nutrition to rural households. And generally, all rural households have a small patch of land wherein they can grow what is known as nutri gardens or kitchen gardens. So those kind of sustainability efforts are there. There are some challenges around it, sir, because a lot of things are run by the state government and a lot of things are proposed by the central government. So the state subject and the central subject kind of becomes a problem. And
yeah, I saw that ecosystem.
And also one of the things is the minimum support price on some of the commodities that the government is able to give. It kind of acts as a deterrent for the farmer to diversify into other products. And of course, there are existential challenges, which we all know, like availability of storage facilities and the middleman. And one thing, sir, since you asked, I would also like to say that we tend to call the middleman as a villain, but in many cases they are not, because they do support the farmers through thick and thin. So that it's a complicated relationship, and means there's a whole ministry working on that. And just sharing my thoughts there.
Okay, I'll talk to you privately on this
Surely,
because
sir.
looks like you have not been involved with any such. You've not done anything yourself. But we shall interact as we go along. Nikhil, sorry, took more time.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Mr. Vasu Rao.
Hi, Siddharth. Can you hear me?
Yes, Vasu sir, please go ahead.
Siddharth, I enjoyed your presentation, and definitely at one level we're still at the tip of the iceberg because the task ahead of us is so humongous, and the governments have had many initiatives happening over the years, and we've had these islands of successes happening, But more often than not, the large models which take place and scale has always been a challenge. Now, I've been fortunate to be associated both in the corporate side and in the donor side in activities in rural India and other parts of the world. Now, I've seen some models which corporates have taken forward. Something like what I was part of ITC Chopal, where they believed in a public-private but also a producer organization partnerships. So they work with about 150 NGOs, but they also work with many farmers and leverage the role of middlemen and worked on a back-to-back model where sourcing ended up in a branded retail product. So there are, we also have CSR monies coming in a big way now. So at one level, I don't think there's dearth of money, but I think what's really lacking to a certain extent is that passion which is coming through to take things to scale, because you don't see returns coming immediately. And the returns very often are not necessarily in cash, but the returns very importantly come in the larger UN impact, millennium goals and so on and so forth. So where do you see corporates playing a larger role? Because at some time donors are going to help, and because they're talking sustainability really coming in. I was also associated with BMGF, etc. So the fund lit for make a model successful, but models more often than not fail. So I think where you get in that spirit of entrepreneurship, a private partnership, and state bodies, like Chivika has been a successful model of sorts, being replicated in other parts of the country. So do you have any comments on this very broad question that I've asked, but at the same time, it could answer some of the questions we can add?
Yeah, so it's quite a broad question. So I can just kind of share my opinion there that corporates, to engage with corporates, especially with the CSR, in my experience has been that CSRs tend to work, even through CSR, they tend to work on commodities or value chains that are linked to their businesses, like the ITC e-Chopal. So, for example, an Airtel uh, could help put up towers that function on renewable energy, which is kind of linked to their CSR, but we are still using generators to power those towers, the signal towers. So that's one. And the second opportunity for CSR, which in my knowledge only one company is doing, is for the corporate to bring in the essential value that they stand for. For example, a Times of India can bring in the value of saying whatever publicity an NGO or an initiative XYZ needs for the next 1 year, we will be able to provide that to you as part of our CSR. But since that is pure business, that is never cross subsidized. What the understanding of CSR right now is in a layman terms to distribute blankets and to measure the impact and to say, oh, we distributed 10,000 blankets. The long-term association and a strategy of a CSR is missing in most companies. And I think only a few companies, and of course with the Tatas leading that, have a proper strategy which is embedded in the company values to take this forward. Second point which you talked about, taking models to scale. So one thing about scale is, sir, that one of the challenges that we face in the sector is the availability of quality manpower. And the challenge of quality manpower arises from the ability to pay. And the ability to pay comes from two places. One, that it's a cost center, it's not a revenue center. And second is again the ecosystem. So even in our own sector, if, for example, if I am coming in from Asian Institute of Management, so it's not like, oh, we would require most, I'm not saying everybody, but most people would say, oh, this guy coming in wearing this blue hat, coming from an international college, thinks he knows stuff. And what does he know? Does he know the field? Has he gone to the farm? Has he done farming? So these are the kind of perceptions. And then the whole ability to for that person to kind of stay in the sector and get paid for it kind of reduces. And third piece is on the scale up pieces, that there are a lot of solutions available with the community and within the states, but we as a sector lack the capacity to identify those solutions, so that there could be limited scalability. We are looking at scalability across the country, which is which perhaps in a diverse society and a diverse culture like India is not a very I won't recommend that very strongly. We have to find local solutions to local problems. This may be an opinion, sir, maybe not very well informed, but this is what my experience has been.
Siddharth, one more question.
Sorry?
One more question. Can you hear me, Siddharth? Vasu
Please,
here
yeah.
again.
Please.
Now with these new amendments happening in agriculture, which was recently announced by the government, do you see hope coming through, doubling farmers' income by 2020? There was a talk 2022, and easing of all these Essential Commodities Act. Does the farmer have a better playing field now?
I would reserve my comments on that, sir, right now. It's a lot of ground needs to be covered, sir. We are not there.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk separately offline one of these days.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Is it me?
Yeah, Aditya, continue.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you. Sorry. Thank you, sir, for your presentation and sharing your insights. Just to the point that you had spoken about earlier, yours is not a very traditional route of going into the development sector from, I mean, after, studying from TIS or IRMA, something like that. You did your MBA, and then earlier, I think you had done an agricultural engineering, and then later you were associated with Tata and Cornell Institute. So, I mean, just your journey and these 3 degrees, which helped you most, and specifically the MBA that you did here, how did it help you? And did you face challenges, as you actually spoke about that perception of coming from a regular MBA program? What was your journey like? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Aditya. So first of all, 2 degrees, not 3. I'm just an agricultural engineer plus MBA. Tata Cornell Institute was job. It was a profession. So yeah, so I think both the engineering and MBA has helped me, but not in the way that maybe you wouldn't expect that answer. But engineering has helped me do things. It has helped me understand how things are done, and it has nothing to do with being an agricultural engineer or an electronics engineer. Obviously, the field helps you to know a bit about what is happening, what's not happening. But essentially, the kind of things we were able to pull off in engineering during our undergrad gave me the confidence that anything could be done if you have the right kind of friends and team around with you. So that's one thing. But what MBA helped me do was kind of put it in a better structure. So during the undergrad, it was more like whatever came to your mind, you could do it. But once I got out of MBA, I could put some structure to it, and I could actually think in a way in long term sense. So I don't know if it answers your question, but yeah, and my journey has been a bit roundabout, because I had been trying to find myself for a very long time, and thankfully this is the longest I've stuck to a sector. So I think this is where I want to be. So yeah, I don't know if it answers your question, Aditya.
Yeah, I think just in terms of your career, like
Aditya, we are running out of little time. So
right, sir, right.
otherwise, if everybody asks supplementary questions, we'll go till 9.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
more questions. Malini, you go ahead, and then Darshan.
Thank you, Nikhil. Siddharth, very absorbing presentation. I have a question pertaining to agro-industry or agri-processing, because you've been talking about producer organizations, etc. In your opinion, what is more critical, access to funds or the marketing part of it, marketing of the produce?
If I had to pick one, I'll say marketing of the produce.
Is there any solution being developed for that? Because this is my experience too, and that's why I asked the development sector.
Means there are multiple solutions being developed. As I said, many solutions are still in prototype stage, and it's not about this is a very, very personal opinion. It's not about the solution and the template of the solution. It's about the people running with the solution. So as an example, there is a maize farmer producer organization in Purnia, Bihar. Again, Bihar comes up. That is being managed professionally by a technical support agency. However, there are, as I said, there might be like 5,000 FPOs across India, and then there might be only 100 or 500 that would be hardly breaking even. And that's simply because of the kind of hand-holding support, the kind of technical support, and the kind of people who are running it. Another example I'll share with you, that at one point in time, we in Telangana, I was working, and we wanted to sell some of the vegetable produce to Big Basket and grofers and all that. And we realized, and this is surprising, that at that time, Big Basket didn't have the capacity to absorb the kind of production that was coming from us. And obviously, there is the ability to hold the institution together like a farmer producer organization, which is, of course, there is, like any organization, there's internal politics there. So that, and I think one key learning, I think I should have mentioned it in the presentation, is most of the development sector professionals, they lack the ability to let go. So we are extremely afraid of failure. If we are invested in any initiative, we would kind of keep watering it, keep giving it fertilizer, even though the plant is dead, and we don't want to see it go down. So there is no exit strategy, basically. That is perhaps one thing I should have mentioned, but thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Malini.
Darshan, go ahead. Darshan, go ahead.
Hi, Siddharth. Very nice presentation. I think very candid remarks as well. So imagine that you are now facing somebody who can write the biggest check. Okay, so resource from the money angle is not an issue, which everybody talks about. Number one. Okay, now you step aside from that. Focus on what you want as the end game, and don't be worried about failure, because this check comes with a lot of money and it can be followed through with more money. So failure is not going to impact you, and you will still be held in high respect. Okay, if that is the case, what is the one solution that you are looking at that you will want to work for in the next 3 to 5 years to really change the landscape in rural India?
One solution, if you can just explain, sir, what your...
So because there are so many things you are now looking at, if you can make one change, one big change to change the rural landscape, amount is available to you. Okay, so let's say I am Bill Gates, I can write the check, and I am telling you as Bill Gates, as Melinda Bill Gates Foundation, don't be worried about failure. Okay, two things that I have always learned about. If you are not worried about failure, then your mind can actually think more. And then you can think of what is the real critical thing that you need to bring to the table to make this happen. So what is the issue and what is the solution you want, including funding is just one piece. It could be a TA from the World Bank, or it could actually be funding for getting stuff done on the ground. A combination of what you just spoke about, let's say FPO, for example, right? So just think of that and give us a solution that you want to achieve, end game, and how do you want to take it forward? I'm actually trying to think through with you, because now you spent 15 years of your life doing this. Next 5 years, what is it that you want to do by somebody writing the check for you? Don't be worried about failure.
There is one thing, sir.
Give me one more second. I'm coming from a background that I have worked very closely with the technology mission in the past.
Okay.
In my engineering days, I have worked on something.
Okay.
So there again, when the oil seed mission was done, it was not with the thought process that it can fail. Right? So Sam Petroda, though he did telecom, he also ran other missions. So oil seed mission is the NDDB oil mission, Dhara, just like Amul, was run as part of that. They were not prepared. They were not worried about failure. They just went through it and got it delivered. So I am talking on very similar lines here.
So sir, honestly, I don't have that big an idea in mind, but one thing that I am working on and I believe can change things is the way you are saying, don't be worried about failure. I would invest a lot in developing new rural enterprises and developing the ecosystem for the same, which I had mentioned earlier in the presentation. So if I may share, there is a program also which is trying to do something similar, but there are a lot of riders. So for example, there are 2-3 things, sir, which if I may say is like the epitome of success or something that you would want to achieve. So 2-3 things is like, let's say, can we have 30 sandboxes in the country, one in each state at least, something like a Deshpande Foundation? Can we have 20 or 30 Arvind Eye Care hospitals? Can we have 30 Narayana Rudales? And whatever is needed to build that, let's invest in that.
Okay.
So when I say Deshpande Foundation, I'm basically saying that in that state, I am ready to fund 10,000, 5,000 entrepreneurs, because I know if I fund 5,000, 1,000 would come up.
Correct.
And then I'm not running after that, and whatever is needed to build that is something I would want to do. So it's not a very end-to-end kind of a thing the way maybe you were expecting, but this is
that's fine, because rural impact is not one solution.
Yes.
It's multiple touch points to the entire life of somebody in the rural area.
Right. So I'm just looking at hopefully I'm trying to build or be part of this ecosystem that stays there. For example, if there is a KVK for to provide agriculture extension support, is there a KVK for enterprise support that can give basic build a basic business plan, help you connect to the market, so that things are smooth and there's a ready pipeline which feeds into the higher level investors, etc., etc.
Thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth, for a wonderful presentation. As everybody said, I would repeat it again. It was very candid, very fluid, and very fluent, I should say. And I'm happy that on behalf of Alumni Association of India, I would like to thank you because we are at the end of this leg of our webinar series. We have had 35 webinars, and in the lockdown from 8th of April till today, we had 25 back-to-back, and then we had every weekend. It's been a great journey. Thank you, participants, for joining in regularly. One person I should put on record and my heartfelt appreciation is Mr. Fisit from Thailand. He has attended all the webinars except one, which was on his Songkran Day. So Fisit, special thanks to you for being one of the loyal participants of this webinar. And thank you very much, guys. And I just want to say that now there are webinars which are being organized in Singapore, in Philippines, in Indonesia, and I'll be sharing those details with you all on our WhatsApp groups. and even on our Facebook page. I would request that all of you also take part, because we are all one, and even though we have various alumni associations, we transcend physical boundaries, and the bonding should continue. So with that, thank you very much, and Salamat po. Thank you, Coratech. Thank you, Bernie. Thank you, MP. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. You have done a great job.